The old community center smelled like dust and cheap floor polish. It was a Thursday evening in the summer of 1987, and the place was packed. Folding chairs squeaked as people settled in, programs rustling in their hands. The annual talent show was the biggest event in this small Tennessee town, and everyone showed up. Families, teenagers, elderly couples who'd been coming for decades. The air buzzed with that particular energy that comes before a show, when anything could happen. Backstage, a 16-year-old girl stood pressed against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. She wore a dress her mother had sewn from fabric bought on clearance, navy blue with small flowers. It was the nicest thing she owned, but even in the dim light backstage it looked homemade. Her thick glasses kept sliding down her nose, and she pushed them up for the 100th time that evening. Through a crack in the curtain, she could see the audience, row after row of familiar faces. There was Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store, the Patterson family who lived 3 streets over. Kids from her high school filled the front rows, the popular ones who never spoke to her except to laugh. Her stomach twisted into knots. "You're up next, honey," the stage manager said, an older man with kind eyes who volunteered every year. "You ready?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure if that was true. She'd been preparing for this moment for months. Her voice teacher had been working with her after school, staying late when the building was empty. They'd practiced the piece over and over until every note was perfect. But standing here now with real people waiting on the other side of that curtain, everything felt different. The current act finished to polite applause. A pair of twins had just done a magic show that went mostly according to plan. The audience was in good spirits, laughing and clapping. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see her mother in the 5th row. She'd taken off work early to be here, losing half a day's pay at the sewing factory. That thought made her heart ache and her resolve strengthen at the same time. And now, the host's voice boomed through the speakers. "Our next performer is a junior at Riverside High. Please welcome her to the stage." This was it. No turning back now. She stepped through the curtain and into the lights. The laughter started almost immediately. It wasn't loud at first. Just a few snickers from the front rows where the kids from school sat. But it grew, a ripple of amusement spreading through the crowd like someone had told a joke she wasn't in on. Her face burned hot. She knew what they were laughing at. She'd lived with it her whole life. The extra weight she carried. The outdated clothes. The way she never quite fit in anywhere. She walked toward the microphone stand at center stage, and each step felt like she was walking through water. The wooden floor creaked under her feet. Someone in the audience whispered something that made the people around them laugh harder. She couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. She'd heard it all before. The host, a local radio DJ who thought he was funnier than he actually was, gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He held the microphone, blocking her path to the stand. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice cheerful in that artificial way adults use when they're trying too hard. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she told him, but her voice came out so quiet the audience probably couldn't hear. Someone yelled, "Speak up!" from the back. "And what are you going to perform for us tonight?" the host asked. She swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "I'm going to sing." "Oh, a singer." The host's eyebrows went up in exaggerated surprise. "And what song have you chosen?" This was the moment she'd been dreading. She knew what would happen when she said it. "An opera piece," she managed. "It's called O mio babbino caro." The laughter that had been bubbling under the surface erupted fully now. Opera. This awkward, overweight girl in her homemade dress was going to sing opera. It was too much. Too ridiculous. The front rows were barely containing themselves. Even some of the adults chuckled, shaking their heads. "Opera," the host repeated, playing to the crowd. "Well, this should be interesting, folks. This should be very interesting indeed." He finally stepped aside and she approached the microphone stand. Her hands found it and gripped tight, knuckles going white. The metal was cool under her palms, solid. Real. She focused on that feeling, trying to anchor herself as the room spun around her. The 3 judges sat at a table to the side of the stage. A music teacher from the county seat, the mayor's wife, and the owner of the local furniture store who sponsored the event every year. They looked at her with expressions that ranged from skeptical to outright doubtful. The music teacher had her pen poised over the scoring sheet, but she wasn't writing. Just waiting. From somewhere in the front row, someone said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This ought to be good." More laughter. Someone else made a comment she couldn't quite catch, but it set off another wave of snickering. Her vision blurred. Whether from the hot stage lights or tears threatening to spill, she wasn't sure. Probably both. Everything her voice teacher had told her about posture and breathing seemed to evaporate from her mind. All those hours of practice felt meaningless now, facing this wall of judgment and mockery. She glanced toward her mother, who sat rigid in her seat, hands clasped in her lap so tightly her fingers were white. Her face showed everything. Pride, yes, but also fear. The protective instinct of a parent watching their child walk into a situation they couldn't control. Next to her mother sat Mrs. Chen, her voice teacher, who'd believed in her when no one else had. Who'd spent countless hours after school unpaid, helping her find her voice. At the piano, old Dorothy waited patiently, her weathered hands resting on the keys. She was the church pianist, had been for 40 years. During their brief rehearsal that afternoon, she'd been the only person who'd treated her normally. No pity, no surprise, just simple kindness. The laughter hadn't stopped. If anything, it was getting worse. Someone in the back threw something, a wadded-up program that fell short of the stage. The host stood off to the side, arms crossed, that same smirk still on his face. Waiting for the show, waiting for her to fail. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to turn around, walk off this stage and never look back, to go home and stuff this dream back into the small, safe box where it had lived for so many years. Nobody would blame her. Her mother would understand. Mrs. Chen would be disappointed but kind about it. She could just disappear into the background again, where it was safe, where nobody noticed her. But then, standing there with her hands gripping that microphone stand like it was the only solid thing in the world, something shifted inside her. A small voice, barely audible over the laughter, reminded her why she was here. This wasn't about them. It had never been about them. Standing there on that stage, frozen in place while the world laughed around her, her mind went somewhere else. Somewhere far from that community center in Tennessee. She was 8 years old again, sitting on the piano bench next to her father in their small living room. Her father had been a music teacher at the elementary school. Not a rich man, not famous, but he understood music in a way that made it come alive. Every evening after dinner, he'd sit at their old upright piano and play, sometimes classical pieces, sometimes jazz, sometimes songs he made up on the spot, and she would sit beside him, watching his fingers dance across the keys, feeling the vibrations through the wooden bench. Close your eyes, he'd told her one night when she was learning her first song. Don't think about the notes on the page. Feel them here. He'd placed his hand over her heart. Music doesn't live on paper. It lives in here and it comes out through your voice as truth. When you sing, you're not performing for anyone. You're sharing a piece of your soul. She hadn't understood it then, not really. She was just a kid who liked to sing along with the radio. But those words had stayed with her, buried deep, waiting for a moment like this. Her father died 3 months later, heart attack, sudden and cruel. One day he was teaching kids about rhythm and melody, and the next day he was gone. The piano stayed in their living room, but nobody played it anymore. It just sat there gathering dust, too painful to touch, too precious to sell. For a year she didn't sing at all. The joy had gone out of it. Her mother worked double shifts at the factory, trying to keep their small house, trying to make sure there was food on the table. They didn't talk much about the sadness that filled every corner of their home. They just moved through their days surviving. Then one afternoon, home alone, she'd opened the piano bench. Inside were all her father's old music books. Classical pieces, opera scores, Broadway songs. She pulled out a book of Italian arias, the pages yellowed and worn from use. She didn't know why she did it, but she started playing one of the simpler pieces, picking out the melody with one finger, and then, almost without meaning to, she began to sing. It was like something broke open inside her. All that grief, all that missing him, it poured out through her voice. She sang that aria standing in their empty living room, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since he died, she felt close to him again, like he was right there beside her listening. After that, she sang whenever she was alone. In her bedroom with the door closed. In the school bathroom during lunch when everyone else was in the cafeteria. In the church sanctuary on weekday afternoons when it was empty and unlocked. Music became her private world, the place where she could be herself without judgment. But being herself in private and being herself in public were two different things. School was brutal. She'd always been a bit heavy, Even as a kid and by middle school, it became the thing everyone noticed first, the thing that defined her in their eyes. Fat girl, nerdy girl, weird girl who ate lunch alone in the library. High school was supposed to be different, but it wasn't. If anything, it was worse. The social hierarchies were more rigid, the cruelty more sophisticated. She learned to make herself small, to avoid attention, to move through the hallways like a ghost. She had exactly 2 friends, both as awkward and invisible as she was. They ate lunch together in the art room, hiding from the cafeteria where the popular kids ruled. Her mother did her best. She sewed clothes because they couldn't afford to buy much, staying up late at her sewing machine after long factory shifts. She told her daughter she was beautiful, that those other kids were just immature, that things would get better. But words couldn't change how the world treated you. Words couldn't make the laughter stop. The only bright spot was Mrs. Chen. She'd transferred to their school the previous year to teach music, and she'd heard her singing one day after class. Not performing, just singing to herself while she cleaned the blackboard erasers. Mrs. Chen had walked into the room and stood there listening, and when the song ended, she'd said, "You have a gift." Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not like that. Not with that certainty. Mrs. Chen started staying after school to work with her. Proper voice training, breathing techniques, posture, pronunciation. She taught her Italian so she could understand what she was singing. She explained the stories behind the arias, the emotions they were meant to convey, and slowly her voice transformed from something pretty into something extraordinary. "You could do this professionally," Mrs. Chen told her one afternoon. "You're that good. But you need confidence. You need to let people hear you." That's how the talent show idea started. Mrs. Chen had suggested it gently, knowing it would terrify her. "It's a safe space," she'd said. "Your community, people who know you, and you need to practice performing in front of an audience. It's the only way to grow." She'd agreed, though every cell in her body screamed against it. She'd spent weeks preparing, perfecting every phrase, every breath. Mrs. Chen had even helped pick the song, "O mio babino caro," "Oh my dear papa," a daughter's plea to her father. It felt right. It felt true. Her mother had been hesitant. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart? You know how people can be." She knew her mother was trying to protect her from the same pain she'd experienced her whole life, but she'd insisted. She needed to do this, needed to prove to herself that she could. Standing on that stage now, with the laughter washing over her like cold water, all those memories flooded back. Every harsh word, every sideways glance, every time she'd been picked last in gym class or eaten lunch alone or walked past a group of classmates and heard them whisper. Every time she'd looked in the mirror and hated what she saw. Every time she'd felt small and worthless and invisible. But she also remembered her father's words. "Music doesn't live on paper. It lives in your heart." She remembered Mrs. Chen's patient voice. "You have a gift." She remembered her mother's tired smile after long shifts at the factory. "I'm so proud of you." And she remembered the feeling of singing in that empty living room, connecting with something bigger than herself. That moment when the music took over and nothing else mattered. Not her body, not her clothes, not what anyone thought of her. Just the pure act of creating something beautiful. The laughter continued. Someone made a joke she couldn't quite hear. The judges looked bored, ready to check a box and move on to the next act. The host had walked off to the side, probably thinking about what witty comment he'd make after she finished. Dorothy sat at the piano, waiting patiently. Their eyes met, and the older woman gave her the smallest nod. Not pity, not doubt, just a simple acknowledgement. "I'm ready when you are." This was the moment. She could walk off right now, and that would be the end of it. A funny story people would tell. Remember that girl who tried to sing opera? A moment of public humiliation that would eventually fade, absorbed into all the other small cruelties of small-town life. Or she could do what she came here to do. Her hands were still shaking on the microphone stand, but she loosened her grip slightly. She took a breath the way Mrs. Chen had taught her. Deep from the diaphragm, she felt her ribs expand, felt the air fill her lungs. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. She caught her mother's eye in the audience. Her mother's face was wet with tears, but she nodded. A small, fierce nod that said everything. "I believe in you." And just like that, the decision was made. She closed her eyes. It was the only way to do this. If she kept looking at their faces, at the smirks and the rolled eyes and the barely contained laughter, she'd never be able to sing. So she shut it all out. The community center, the audience, the judges, all of it. She let the darkness behind her eyelids become her whole world. Dorothy began to play. The opening notes of the aria drifted through the speakers, delicate and beautiful. The piano had been tuned that morning, and it sounded clear and true. Those first gentle chords filled the space, and for a moment the laughter quieted slightly. People were waiting to see what would happen next, but she didn't sing. Not yet. The introduction continued, the melody weaving through the air like a silk ribbon. Dorothy played with such feeling, such grace. You could hear decades of experience in every note. The old woman knew this piece by heart, had probably played it 100 times in her long life. Her weathered fingers moved across the keys with certainty. Still, she stood there silent, eyes closed, breathing. The laughter started picking up again. This was even better than they'd expected. Not only was she awkward and out of place, but now she couldn't even start singing. Someone in the front row whispered loudly. She forgot the words. More snickering. The host, standing off to the side, raised his eyebrows at the judges as if to say, "See what I mean?" But she wasn't frozen from fear anymore. She was listening. Really listening. She was finding that place inside herself where the music lived. That place her father had told her about all those years ago. The place that had nothing to do with this stage or these people or this moment. The place that was eternal and true and hers alone. She thought about the words she was about to sing. "O mio babino caro." Oh, my dear papa. She'd studied the full text with Mrs. Chen, had learned what it meant. A young woman pleading with her father to let her marry the man she loves, threatening to throw herself into the river if he refuses. It was dramatic, passionate, desperate. It was a daughter's cry from the depths of her heart. When her father was alive, she would have done anything to make him proud. Would have thrown herself into any river, climbed any mountain, faced any challenge. His love had been the steady ground beneath her feet. And when he died, that ground had disappeared. She'd spent 8 years trying to find it again. Maybe that's what this moment was. Not about proving something to these people who laughed at her. Not about winning a small-town talent show, but about honoring the gift her father had given her. About stepping into the person he'd always believed she could be. The piano continued its gentle introduction. Dorothy glanced back at her briefly, not with concern but with understanding. She'd wait as long as needed. The music would be there when she was ready. Someone in the audience threw something. She heard it land on the stage, heard the soft thud of paper hitting wood, a wadded-up napkin from the concession stand. It rolled toward her feet and stopped a few inches from her shoes. More laughter erupted. The moment was becoming a spectacle, exactly what the front row had hoped for, entertainment at her expense. Her mother made a sound, a small gasp that carried in the brief moment between laughs. She was probably half standing, ready to storm the stage and pull her daughter to safety, ready to shield her from this cruelty the way she'd tried to shield her from every cruelty. But she knew her mother wouldn't actually do it, wouldn't make a scene, would sit there suffering, watching her child be humiliated, powerless to stop it. That thought, more than anything else, made something crystallize inside her. Her mother had worked herself to exhaustion to give her a life. Had sewn this dress by lamplight after a 10-hour factory shift. Had scrimped and saved to afford the little they had. Had gone without so her daughter could have music lessons, could have books, could have a chance at something better. Her mother had never given up, even when giving up would have been so much easier. She wouldn't give up either. Her eyes were still closed, but she felt her shoulders straighten, felt her spine lengthen, felt her feet plant more firmly on the wooden stage. All those hours with Mrs. Chen learning proper posture and breath support, it came flooding back. Her body remembered what her mind had almost forgotten. She took a breath. Not a shallow, nervous breath, but a real singer's breath, deep and full, expanding her rib cage, filling her lungs completely, the breath her father had taught her to take before singing. The breath that gave you power. And then finally she opened her mouth and let the first note come out. What emerged from her was not what anyone in that room expected. The sound was pure, achingly, impossibly pure. It soared up and out, filling every corner of the community center with a clarity that seemed almost otherworldly. Not the shaky, nervous voice of a teenage girl, but something else entirely, something transcendent. That first phrase, "O mio babino caro," floated through the air like it had wings. Each word perfectly shaped, perfectly placed. The Italian pronunciation was flawless, each vowel round and open, each consonant crisp and clear. But more than technique, more than training, there was emotion in it. Real, raw, honest emotion that hit you in the chest. The laughter stopped, not gradually, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. 1 second there was noise and mockery and cruel amusement, and the next second there was absolute silence except for her voice and Dorothy's piano. She kept her eyes closed and kept singing. Mi piace bello, bello. I like him, he is handsome, handsome. The melody climbed higher and her voice climbed with it, never straining, never pushing. It just floated up to those high notes like it was the most natural thing in the world. The popular kids in the front row sat frozen, their smiles gone, their phones forgotten in their laps. The judges leaned forward in their seats, pens hovering over score sheets, mouths slightly open. The mayor's wife had a hand pressed to her chest. The music teacher's eyes were wide with something like shock. Her mother was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, one hand covering her mouth. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, tears flowing freely down her own cheeks, her face transformed with pride and vindication and joy. All those people who had come to laugh, who had come to judge, who had expected nothing more than an embarrassing performance they could gossip about later. They sat stunned. Some were leaning forward as if being physically closer would help them understand what they were hearing. Others sat rigidly still, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had been cast over the room. Even the host had stopped smirking. He stood in the wings with his arms hanging at his sides, staring at the stage like he'd never seen it before. She sang through the middle section, her voice warm and full on the lower notes, bright and shimmering on the higher ones. Every phrase was shaped with intention, every word infused with meaning. This wasn't just a pretty song. It was a story, a desperate plea, a girl telling her father that without his blessing, without his understanding, she would rather die. And maybe that's what made it so powerful, because in a way she was making her own desperate plea, not about marriage or romance, but about being seen, really seen. Not as the awkward girl, the fat girl, the poor girl, the weird girl, but as a human being with depth and talent and worth. The aria built toward its climax, the melody soaring higher and higher. Babbo, pietà, pietà. Father, have pity, have pity. Her voice rang out with such clarity, such power, that it seemed impossible it was coming from this teenage girl on this small-town stage. Some people in the audience were crying now. Not just her mother and Mrs. Chen, but others too. The elderly church pianist had tears running down her face as she played. A man in the third row wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The woman next to him clutched her husband's arm, her face wet with tears. Something was happening in that room. Something none of them had anticipated. They'd come for entertainment, for an evening out, for the pleasant ordinariness of a community talent show. Instead, they were witnessing something rare and real. They were watching a girl transform before their eyes, watching her step into her power, watching her claim her space in the world through the sheer force of her gift. The boy who had thrown the napkin sat with his head bowed, his face red, unable to look at the stage. His friends beside him had gone quiet, all their earlier bravado evaporated. They looked young suddenly and small and ashamed. She was near the end now, the final phrases approaching. Her eyes were still closed, but her face had changed. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. There was only the music flowing through her like water, like light, like breath itself. Voglio andare al Ponte Vecchio. I want to go to the Ponte Vecchio, the old bridge in Florence where lovers meet. Her voice carried such longing, such hope, such pure human desire to be loved and accepted and free. And in that moment, everyone in that room understood. They didn't need to speak Italian to feel what she was feeling. The music communicated what words could not. This was about more than a song. This was about a soul crying out to be heard. The final note hung in the air like a perfect crystal. She held it, her voice steady and pure, letting it fill every corner of the room. Dorothy's hands were still on the piano keys, the last chord sustaining, supporting that beautiful sound. And then, gently, both the voice and the piano faded into silence. She stood there, eyes still closed, the microphone stand still gripped in her hands. Her heart was pounding. She could feel it beating in her chest, in her throat, in her fingertips. For a moment, she was afraid to open her eyes, afraid to see their faces, afraid that when she looked, she'd find them laughing again, that the magic she'd felt while singing had been only in her head. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, that presses down on you. The kind of silence that happens when something has shifted in the universe and everyone is trying to understand what just occurred. Then someone started clapping. It was a single person at first, somewhere in the middle of the room. Slow, deliberate claps that echoed in the quiet. Then another person joined in, and another. And then suddenly the entire room erupted. The sound was thunderous. Not polite applause, not the dutiful clapping you give because it's expected. This was something else entirely. People were on their feet, rising from their folding chairs, applauding so hard their hands must have hurt. Some were shouting. Some were still crying and clapping at the same time, tears streaming down their faces. She opened her eyes. The sight before her was almost impossible to process. Every single person in that community center was standing. The popular kids in the front row who'd been laughing minutes before were on their feet, clapping hard, their faces transformed. The judges at their table were standing too, applauding with everyone else. The music teacher had both hands pressed to her face, tears visible even from the stage. The mayor's wife was openly sobbing. Her mother and Mrs. Chen were clutching each other, both crying so hard they could barely stand. Dorothy had left the piano bench and was standing too, her weathered face wet with tears, clapping with such joy it was like watching someone witness a miracle. The host stood frozen in the wings, his expression completely changed. The smug superiority was gone. He looked stunned, shaken, like he'd just witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew. She let go of the microphone stand, her legs suddenly weak. The applause continued, rolling over her in waves. People were calling out, shouting encouragement, whistling. A woman in the back yelled, "Bravo!" Several others picked up the cry. "Bravo! Bravo!" She didn't know what to do with her hands. She'd never had a standing ovation before. Never had more than 2 or 3 people listen to her sing at once. This was beyond anything she'd imagined, beyond anything she'd let herself hope for. She stood there awkwardly, her homemade dress suddenly not feeling quite so shabby, her glasses not quite so thick. The applause went on and on. 30 seconds, 40, a full minute. People didn't want to stop. It was like they were trying to make up for the laughter, trying to apologize without words, trying to say, "We were wrong about you. We're sorry. We see you now." Finally, gradually, the applause began to fade. People sat down, but the energy in the room had completely transformed. Where there had been casual amusement and mild interest before, now there was electricity. Everyone was talking at once, leaning toward their neighbors, gesturing toward the stage. She caught fragments of conversation. "Did you hear that? I had no idea. That voice. Where did she learn to sing like that?" The host seemed to remember he had a job to do. He walked back on stage, and his whole demeanor was different. The cocky radio personality was gone, replaced by something more genuine. He approached the microphone, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Well," he said, and had to clear his throat, "I don't think any of us were expecting that." The audience laughed, but it was different laughter now. Warm, inclusive, acknowledging their own surprise. Several people clapped again. "That was absolutely incredible," the host continued. He looked at her directly, and there was real respect in his eyes. "Truly extraordinary. Thank you for sharing that with us." She managed to nod, still not quite trusting her voice for speaking. The host gestured toward the wings, and she walked off stage on shaky legs. As soon as she was out of the spotlight, her mother was there, pulling her into a fierce hug. Her mother was shaking, crying into her shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," her mother whispered. So proud. Your father would have been too. He would have been so proud, baby." Mrs. Chen wrapped her arms around both of them. "I knew," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I knew you could do it. I knew they would hear what I hear." The rest of the talent show continued, but everything felt different now. The other performers did their best, and they were fine, some even quite good. But nothing came close to what had just happened. That moment had been lightning in a bottle, and everyone knew it. During the performances, people kept glancing back at her where she sat with her mother and Mrs. Chen. Some smiled. Some gave her thumbs up. The boy who'd thrown the napkin walked past on his way to the bathroom, and he stopped. He looked like he wanted to say something, His face red with shame, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he just nodded at her and kept walking. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. When all the acts had finished, the judges huddled together to deliberate. This should have taken a while. There were 15 performers total, and normally they'd carefully discuss each one, debate the merits, maybe argue a little. But their conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. The host took the stage to announce the winners. Third place went to a dance trio from the local studio. They came up to collect their small trophy, smiling and proud. Second place went to a man who'd played guitar and sang country songs. He accepted his trophy with grace, though he kept glancing at her with a knowing look. He understood. And now, the host said, holding the first place trophy, I think we all know who won tonight. The judges were unanimous. Actually, they took about 30 seconds to decide because there was absolutely no question. He paused, looking out at the audience. This young lady showed us something special tonight. She showed us courage. She showed us what real talent looks like, and she reminded all of us not to judge a book by its cover. His voice got thick again. First place by unanimous decision, and honestly one of the best performances I've ever seen in 20 years of hosting this show. She walked up on stage for the second time that night, but this time it was completely different. This time people were smiling at her, really smiling with warmth and admiration. She accepted the trophy, which was bigger than she expected, heavier than she expected. The host shook her hand, and when the photographer from the local paper asked them to pose together, the host put his arm around her shoulders like they were old friends. More applause, more tears. When she walked off stage with her trophy, people reached out to touch her arm, to shake her hand. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store caught her on the way out. Honey, that was beautiful. Just beautiful. You made my whole week, you know that? The old woman's eyes were red from crying. The Patterson family stopped her in the parking lot. Our daughter takes piano lessons, Mr. Patterson said. She gets nervous performing. Would you mind if we told her about you? About what you did tonight? More people wanted to talk to her, to congratulate her, to tell her how moved they were. The shy girl who usually ate lunch alone in the library was suddenly surrounded by people who wanted to know her name, wanted to tell her she was amazing, wanted to be associated with the magic that had happened. Her mother finally managed to get her to their old car, protecting her from the crowd like a bodyguard. As they drove home through the quiet streets, the trophy sitting on her lap catching the streetlight, her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. Everything's going to be different now, her mother said softly. You know that, right? She looked out the window at the familiar houses, the familiar trees, the familiar town that suddenly felt like it might have room for her after all. Her throat was sore from singing. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline. Her face hurt from the unfamiliar sensation of smiling so much. I know, she whispered, but she had no idea just how different things would become. The Monday after the talent show, she walked into school and everything had changed. Kids she'd never spoken to before said hello in the hallways. Some wanted to talk about the performance. Others just smiled at her, a genuine smile, not the kind that hid mockery behind it. Even the popular kids, the ones who'd laughed, treated her differently. Some looked embarrassed when they saw her. A few actually apologized, stumbling over their words, trying to explain that they hadn't meant anything by it. She didn't know how to feel about the apologies. Part of her wanted to say it was okay to make them feel better, but Mrs. Chen had told her something wise that weekend. You don't owe anyone forgiveness on their timeline. What you did took courage. What they did took none. Let them sit with that. The local newspaper ran a story. Hidden Talent Shines at Annual Show, read the headline with a photo of her holding the trophy. The article described her performance as stunning and unforgettable. They quoted the music teacher, judge saying it was the best amateur performance she'd heard in 30 years. Then the local TV news picked it up. They came to her house with cameras, interviewed her in her living room with her father's old piano in the background. Her mother took another half day off work, dressed in her best clothes, sitting proudly beside her daughter. The story aired that Thursday evening, and suddenly people across the county knew her name. But the real change came 2 weeks later. Mrs. Chen called her into the music room after school, and there was a man there she'd never seen before. Tall, gray-haired, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in their small school. He introduced himself as a professor from the state university, head of their vocal performance program. I saw the news story, he said. And I managed to get a recording of your performance from the talent show organizers. I've listened to it about a dozen times now. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst through her chest. You have a remarkable gift, he continued. Raw, yes. You need training, refinement, proper technique beyond what even an excellent teacher like Mrs. Chen can provide in a high school setting. But the foundation is there. The natural instrument is there. And most importantly, the emotional truth is there. That's the part you can't teach. He laid out several papers on the music room desk. Scholarship information, full ride to the university, private lessons with renowned instructors, room and board included, everything covered. We don't usually recruit like this, he admitted. But what you have is rare, very rare. And I'd like to help you develop it properly. She looked at Mrs. Chen, who was crying again, smiling through the tears. Her teacher nodded. This is it. This is your door opening. You walk through it. Her mother worked extra hours to help with the smaller expenses, the things the scholarship didn't cover. People from church donated money for books and supplies. The grocery store manager, Mrs. Henderson, organized a fundraiser at the community center. The same room where she'd performed now hosted a potluck dinner to send her off to university. Nearly everyone who'd been at the talent show showed up, wanting to be part of her story, wanting to help. University was hard. Not the singing part that felt like coming home. But everything else. The academic classes, the theory and history, the competition with other talented students who'd been training since childhood. Some of them had wealthy parents who'd paid for private lessons their whole lives. Some of them had attended prestigious performing arts high schools. She was just a girl from a small town with a used car and homemade clothes. But she worked, harder than anyone. She was always first in the practice rooms in the morning, last to leave at night. She studied while other students partied. She recorded herself and listened back, fixing every flaw, polishing every phrase. And slowly, steadily, she grew. Her voice teacher at university, a former opera singer who'd performed in Europe, pushed her hard. You have something special, she told her. But special isn't enough. This profession is brutal. You need to be undeniable. So she became undeniable. She won the university's concerto competition as a sophomore. She performed with the regional orchestra as a junior. She spent a summer at a prestigious music festival in Italy, studying where the great singers had studied, walking the same streets they'd walked. She sent postcards home to her mother, describing the art and the architecture and the music that filled the air. During her senior year, she auditioned for graduate programs. The top conservatories, the kind of schools that seemed impossible for someone like her. But she got in. Multiple offers, full scholarships. Professional managers started reaching out, wanting to represent her. 3 years after that, she stood in the wings of a very different stage, Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. The walls had heard Tchaikovsky, Bernstein, Horowitz. Every legendary musician had played this room. And now she was about to walk out there. She wore a beautiful gown, emerald green silk that her mother had helped her pick out. Her mother, who was sitting in the audience right now, in the 5th row, right next to Mrs. Chen, who'd taken a week off from teaching to be here. Dorothy, the church pianist, now in her 80s, had made the trip too, sitting beside them. They'd flown in together, 3 women who'd believed in her when no one else had. Her manager had invited other people too. Reporters from major publications, recording executives, opera company directors. This was a showcase, a debut, the kind of performance that could launch a real career. The pressure was enormous. But as she stood there waiting for her cue, she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about a small community center in Tennessee, about folding chairs and a dusty stage and the sound of laughter, about the moment she'd closed her eyes and decided to sing anyway, about her father's voice saying music lives in your heart. The announcer introduced her to the packed hall. Thousands of people, all the seats filled, the air buzzing with anticipation. She walked out onto the stage and the applause was warm and welcoming. She looked out at the sea of faces and found her mother, found Mrs. Chen, found Dorothy. They were all crying already before she'd sung a single note. She smiled, took her place at the microphone. The orchestra behind her readied their instruments. The conductor looked at her, eyebrow raised, waiting for her signal. She nodded. She was ready. As the first notes swelled from the orchestra, she thought about that scared 16-year-old girl who'd stood on a small-town stage 8 years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what she knew now. That the people who laugh at you don't get to define you. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's singing anyway. That sometimes the moments that try to break you are actually the moments that make you. But maybe that girl had known it all along. Maybe that's why she'd sung. She opened her mouth and her voice filled Carnegie Hall with the same pure, honest sound that had filled that community center so long ago. But it was bigger now, stronger, more refined. Years of training had polished the raw gift into something transcendent. The audience sat transfixed. No one laughed. No one whispered. They just listened, transported by the beauty of what they were hearing. And when the final note faded, when the last echo died away in that storied hall, the silence that followed was the same silence that had followed her performance all those years ago. The silence of people who'd just witnessed something extraordinary. Then the applause came. Thunderous, joyful, sustained. People on their feet calling out, throwing flowers onto the stage. The conductor was crying. The orchestra members were applauding her from their seats. Her mother and Mrs. Chen and Dorothy were standing, holding each other, weeping with joy. After the performance backstage, a famous opera director offered her a contract. A recording executive wanted to talk about an album. Journalists wanted interviews. But first she hugged her mother, held her tight and whispered, "Thank you." "Your father would be so proud," her mother said, as she'd said 1,000 times before. But this time she added something new. "I think he knew. Even when you were little, I think he knew you'd end up here." Later that night, alone in her hotel room, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. She wasn't that scared teenager anymore. She'd grown into herself, grown into her gift, grown into her power. But she was still the same person underneath. Still the girl who'd learned that your worth isn't determined by the people who laugh at you. She thought about all the young people out there who felt invisible, who felt like they didn't fit, who carried something beautiful inside them that the world couldn't see yet. She hoped her story would reach them somehow. Hoped they'd know that their moment would come too. That the people who dismissed them today didn't get to write the ending of their story. She turned off the light and climbed into bed, exhausted and happy. Tomorrow there would be more performances, more opportunities, more dreams becoming real. But tonight she just wanted to rest, to sit with the fullness of this moment, to honor how far she'd come. From a small town in Tennessee to Carnegie Hall. From laughter to standing ovations. From invisible to undeniable. All because one night she decided to sing anyway.